Hello, and welcome to installing SQL Server 2016. This is going to be a minimalistic install. I'm not going to install anything that we do not need to just execute queries and make databases. So it'll be as simple as I can make it. The first thing you need to do, of course, is to download SQL Server 2016. In this case, I'm going to download the developer edition. So if I just go to the web, I can navigate to this website at Microsoft's location, and I will give you a link in the information section for this video. And you can just download the developer edition right here. You will have to log in with a Microsoft Dev account. They are free, and SQL Server 2016 Developer Edition is free. There is no charge for this. It makes it nice for us that want to mess around with SQL and learn some stuff without having to actually go pay for it. And the Developer Edition has tons and tons and tons of features, far more than we'll ever use in my videos anyway. Pretty much everything you can do with SQL Server, for the most part, is supported in Developer Edition, and it costs you nothing. You cannot use it for production data, but it is certainly designed specifically for the developer, so you don't have to pay for a license for SQL Server to go and practice and write applications for it. Good move, Microsoft. I have already downloaded this, so I don't have to go download it again. I'm going to go ahead and close my browser now. When you're done downloading, feel free to return. And once you have it downloaded, you will have a nice little ISO file. And if I'm in Windows 10, as I am here, I can just double click on this and mount it. Otherwise, if your operating system does not mount ISOs, you'll have to get it mounted or burned to a disk somehow. In our case, however, we can just double click on that ISO. And there we are. So it mounts directly to a hard drive, acts as if it were as a DVD. And all we need to do is double click Setup. It will, of course, require administrator permissions to install this. You will require local administrator permissions to install this. So you'll have to say yes to your user account control here. And that will run the opening selector. And as you can see, there's a bunch of stuff here. This is a whole bunch of information beyond just installation. Again, I'm going to keep it as short and sweet as I can. In the real world, or if you're planning on taking the SQL Server test, you need to be reading a lot of these documents. In our case, though, it's easier. Click Installation. On the right-hand side of this window, you will see New SQL Server Standalone Installation. Click that, and that will actually run the SQL Server 2016 installer. And here we are. We are installing Developer Edition, so there is no need for a product key. It is free. Click Next. In the real world, you should read this. No joke, you really should. But in our world, since we're trying to keep it short, I'm going to click I accept the license term and click Next. Microsoft Update can be used to download updates and install them for SQL Server. Since this is going to be on a desktop machine, I would recommend highly that you do this. You want to keep your SQL Server updated. If you're in a corporate scenario where you don't know for sure if those patches are okay or not, follow what your administrator tells you to do. In our case here, though, it's a local machine, totally reasonable to use Microsoft Update for this. Select that and click Next. SQL Server will now download any setup files it needs, any patches that it thinks it needs, and it will do a rules check and a prerequisite check. The only warning we get here will be probably the Windows Firewall warning. Again, this is a local install, made for developers only. It is not necessary for other people to get into this SQL Server from outside the local machine. I would never recommend that you open up the firewall unless you actually need people from outside to get onto your machine. In this case, that should not be necessary. So we're not going to change that warning. We're not going to go do anything based on that warning. We can just leave the firewall as it is. It's okay to have the stuff blocked. We're just going to use it on this machine. Click Next. Now remember I told you that this was going to be a minimal install. And there's a reason for that. What I call this is the Judge Smales system of security. And you might be asking, what the heck is that? You'll get nothing and like it. The Judge Smales system of security. We call it the principle of least privilege. You shouldn't get any extra stuff on this box unless you actually need it. So we're going to follow that to the letter. And in our case, select only Database Engine Services. That is all we actually need for this install. We can always go add more later. Select Database Engine Services. You can leave all of your directories as they sit. There's no reason to change them unless you really want to. Click Next. SQL Server has not been installed on this machine, so it needs its initial default instance. I rarely tell people to rename the instance ID. The only reason why is because so many things actually like that and so many books actually use that. It can be a bit irritating to switch it, and since this is a developer-only install, there's no reason why it needs to be changed. On a production server, I often will rename this just to make life a little harder for those people trying to hack it. It isn't going to keep anyone that actually knows what they're doing out from being able to hit your server, but it will keep the riffraff out, kind of like what locking your house does. It's not going to keep someone out if they're really determined to get in, but keeps the riffraff out. So we leave ours, since it's a developer machine, on MS SQL Server. Click Next. We do not need to do anything here either. A couple things are important. Because this is a developer machine, we can just go ahead and leave it connected and using the standard services. In a domain situation, or if this is actually going to be a member server that's not a developer machine, you're obviously going to have to follow the proper guidelines that your admin has set up. There's a couple things here we should probably mention though. Never do this unless you know what you're doing. Do not select Grant Perform Volume Maintenance Task, because what this will do is this will allow you to create files without the zeroing of data pages. And what that means in English is data that was previously on the drive or previously in those pages will not be erased by writing zeros to them. Basically, old data could still be available, and that is generally not a good idea. We want to always make sure that that data gets zeroed out. So we do not select that. Click the tab up here for collation. Generally, you do not need to change this either. This is the default collation for SQL Server, and collation deals with sorting, and it deals with the character set that it uses, and it deals with Unicode, etc. We do not need to change this for our server because there is nothing here necessary to do that. If you need to, you usually will know. Otherwise, leave it alone. Click Next. Here, there is one important thing to do. You want to make yourself an administrator. So we go down to Add Current User and click that. It'll take a moment while it looks up the current user in the database, and it adds it. Now, if you need to add other administrators, there is always the Add button there, and if you make a mistake, you can even remove. I will not turn on mixed mode authentication. That means that we are not going to use SQL Server authentication at this time. We could if we wanted to. There's nothing wrong with it. You can if you wish, but it's not as secure as the Windows authentication mode, so you shouldn't turn it on unless you actually need it. Let's go ahead and run through these tabs too, just for kicks. Click on Data Directories. Don't change this unless you know what you're doing, because it basically has to be set up for each of the individual instances. As you can see, the MS SQL Server directories there. There's no reason why you can't do it. It's just be careful. You need to make sure that each instance gets its own unique set of directories. No biggie, just make sure you do that. Click Temp DB. It understands automatically what best practices are for Temp DB. As you can see, it's made 4 files for me. That's because I have 4 cores. A core is a CPU as far as SQL Server is concerned for this task. You need to have 1 file for each one of those for maximum speed on file writes and reads. Therefore, it already selects, knowing that I've got 4 cores, Artificial, of course, being that I'm in a virtual machine, but it's okay. So we can just leave it alone. There's no reason to change any of this. Click on file stream. For right now, we're not going to use file stream either. Like I said, we're going to keep this as simple as possible. File stream basically allows us to keep binary objects on the file system rather than in the SQL Server database. It makes things more efficient. It's very useful for things like SharePoint, as an example. But in this case, we don't need anything that we are not going to be using right away, and we can always use it later. Click back on server configuration. Verify that you're added to the administrators. Looks like we are. Click next. And that's it. Click install, and SQL Server will begin installing. You will have to wait for a little while, so I'll speed it up in the video, and I'll catch back with you on the other side. And as you can see here, looks like we have a successful install. Let me double triple check here. Yep, looks good. As you can see, SQL Server shows succeeded in all tasks. Everything looks like it worked fine. So go ahead and click close. Our next mission in the next video will be to install the SQL Server management tools. I am going to put that in a different video because not everybody needs to install the management tools on the box they're placing this. Obviously, in our case, this will be a requirement because we're going to be using it in later videos. But we cannot assume that people always want that. In a developer situation, though, yeah, we would assume that you'd want this, I suppose. So that'll be our next video. For now, we're good. Thank you very much. Hope to see you again.